Gwen, let's be honest. Your attitude lately hasn't exactly screamed team player. We need people who understand how this company works. I think it's time we part ways.
That sentence wouldn't come until the end, but everything that led to it started on a rainy Tuesday morning. I got called into my manager's office on a quiet Tuesday morning. I never expected a business trip to change my whole life. It had been raining since dawn. Portland always carried that smell of wet pavement and decaf, especially near the office. I'd parked in the far lot, umbrella flipped inside out, and showed up to my desk with damp shoes and coffee from the Daily Roast down the block. I hadn't even had a sip before the calendar invite blinked onto my screen. Subject line: Meeting, Donnelly, 9:30 tan, May, sharp, no details, just a name and a time. I stared at it for a few seconds, not because it was unusual. Eric Donnelly called me into his office for everything from project updates to just touching base, but because something about today felt loaded, like I had walked into a play where everyone else already knew the script, but me. I'd been at Stratus Core Solutions for 5 years. 5 years of spreadsheets, supply chain disasters, and last-minute client meetings. I was the project coordinator who picked up dropped balls, soothed angry vendors, and never missed a deadline. Promotions had been promised, hinted at, delayed. I kept showing up anyway. That morning, I thought maybe, just maybe, the tides were finally shifting. The company had landed a new defense logistics client in Southern California, and I'd stayed late every night pulling feasibility reports. It had to mean something. Eric's door was already cracked open when I arrived. He looked up from his phone, flashed that smile too polished, too quick, and gestured for me to enter. "Gwen," he said, "come in. Shut the door behind you." I did, resisting the instinct to leave it open, like I always did when we met one-on-one. His office smelled like new leather and citrus cologne. The blinds were half drawn, letting in just enough light to reflect off his framed certificates and an autographed golf ball he claimed was from a congressman. "You've been killing it lately," he said, folding his hands over his desk, especially with the Anaheim prospect. "HQ's noticed." "Thanks. I've been really focused on that rollout," I said. He nodded, "and I've got something to reward that effort. We're flying down next week, you and me. A couple days on site, talk to their ops managers, assess inventory flow. It's a big opportunity." I sat straighter. I had hoped for this. "That sounds great." He smiled again. "Glad you think so. Travel's already in motion. Flights are booked for Sunday night. Hotels just off the freeway, near the supply yard." Something in his voice dipped so subtle I almost missed it. "Only thing is, hotels are tight. There's a convention in town. Only one room left when we booked. It has 2 beds. Of course," he added quickly, "but just wanted to make sure you're okay with that." He didn't blink. Neither did I. "No, I'm not," I said. His smile froze for a second. Then it slid back into place like a mask. "I don't think you understand the logistics here." "I understand perfectly. If this is a business trip, then we should have business-appropriate accommodations. The budget can't cover 2 rooms. Then maybe someone else should go." He leaned back slowly, drumming his fingers against the desk. "Gwen, you've always been a team player. I'd hate for this to be the hill you decide to die on." I felt my heart pounding but kept my voice even. "Then you'll have to find another team player." We locked eyes. 5 years of polite nods and walking on eggshells condensed into that single moment. I could feel it shift. His eyes narrowed, just enough to register the bruise on his ego. "I'll have to reevaluate your role on the project," he said coolly. "That's your decision," I replied, standing. I walked out before he could say another word. My legs moved steadily, even as my hands trembled. At my desk, I sat down and stared blankly at my monitor. My inbox pinged once an auto-reply from a vendor. I didn't open it. All I could think about was the way Eric's voice changed when he didn't get what he wanted. Not angry. Worse. Controlled. That afternoon, I stayed late, not to work, just to exist somewhere I wasn't questioned yet. I answered emails like nothing had happened, ate my sandwich at my desk, and watched the office slowly empty out. No one said a word. People avoided eye contact like it was contagious. When I finally left, I drove home in silence. No music, just the sound of tires on wet roads, and my thoughts cycling louder than the engine. I didn't tell my mom that night. I called her, out of habit, like I did every Tuesday. She asked how things were. I said, normal, and we talked about the book club she'd joined at the community center. Later, I made tea, sat on my living room floor with my knees pulled in, and opened the leather-bound journal I kept in the filing cabinet under old tax forms. I hadn't written in it for months, but tonight felt different. I wrote, Day 0. He framed it as a business trip. I said no. He didn't like that. I don't know what comes next, but I'm done staying quiet. I closed the journal and stared out the window at the street lamps flickering in the rain. In the office, Eric Donnelly was still my boss. On paper, he still held the cards, but something had changed, something irreversible. I just didn't know how fast it would all unravel. 2 days later, HR called me downstairs. My stomach knew before my brain caught up. It was a Thursday. The sky had cleared, but the air still held the smell of wet bark and bus exhaust. I'd just poured myself a second cup of the cheap office coffee when the call came through Sandra Hoyt from HR. Her voice so flat it made my skin crawl. "Gwen, could you come to conference room B? We need a few minutes of your time." No mention of what it was about, no smile in her voice. I'd worked here long enough to know what that meant. I set the mug down carefully, as if moving too fast would make it all worse, and walked past my coworkers with a small nod, like I wasn't walking into a storm. The hallway to the conference room felt longer than usual. As I reached the door, I paused to breathe, but my breath caught in my throat when I saw who was waiting. Sandra was already seated at the far end of the table, hands folded. Next to her was a man in a tailored navy suit, briefcase open, face unreadable. Robert Chen. I learned a minute later, corporate legal, and then Eric walked in. Of course, I stayed standing. "Please, Gwen," Sandra said, gesturing to the chair opposite them. "Let's just have a conversation." I sat down, kept my spine straight. I could feel Eric watching me with that careful, managerial concern he used like cologne. "Gwen," Sandra began again, "we've received reports of interpersonal conflicts affecting your performance, particularly in regard to collaboration and responsiveness to leadership direction." I didn't look at Eric. I kept my eyes on the tabletop. "What exactly does that mean?" I asked. "Mr." Chen cleared his throat and opened a folder. "There have been several documented instances of insubordination and unprofessional behavior, refusing assignments, challenging managerial authority, contributing to a hostile work environment." Hostile. They were going to flip the script. "I see," I said slowly. "And when were these instances documented?" Eric spoke for the first time. "Over the past 6 months. Your attitude, Gwen, it's been not consistent with company culture. We need people who are aligned with leadership. Cooperative." There it was, the word again, cooperative. It wasn't about performance. It wasn't about culture. It was about control. "We're terminating your employment. Effective immediately," Sandra said. I took a slow breath. I could feel my fingers twitching under the table. I pressed them into my lap. "I'd like to ask about severance." "Mr." Chen slid a paper across the table. 2 weeks' pay, contingent upon your signature here. Standard non-disclosure terms. You agree not to disparage the company or discuss the circumstances of your termination. In other words, shut up and disappear. I picked up the paper, scanned the familiar legal phrasing. I'd seen NDAs before. I knew exactly what they were buying. Silence. Reputational insurance. "I'll need to review this with my own attorney," I said, setting the document back on the table. "That's your right, of course," Robert replied, "but the offer expires at close of business today." I stood, smoothed my skirt, looked Sandra in the eye. "Thank you for the opportunity. I've learned a lot here." Then I walked out with every ounce of dignity I had left. Packing my desk took 12 minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't make a scene. I placed my coffee mug, framed photo of Mom and me from her last birthday, and my leather-bound notebook into the cardboard box the receptionist handed me without meeting my gaze. People watched me, pretended not to, but I felt it, the ripple, the knowing. A few coworkers nodded. No one said anything. Out in the parking lot, I sat behind the wheel of my car for a long time. I didn't turn the ignition. I didn't even look at my phone. I just sat there, staring at the steering wheel, thinking, that's it. 5 years, a whole career, gone because I said no. But then, something inside me shifted. I wasn't crying. I wasn't shaking. I felt clear. I drove home without the radio on. The sun was setting, and the sidewalks were filled with people walking dogs, drinking coffee, pretending the world wasn't full of people like Eric Donnelly. At home, I didn't collapse. I didn't rant. I brewed tea green this time and opened my laptop. Then I pulled out the small USB drive I'd hidden in the lining of my old purse. I'd started recording my private conversations with Eric a month ago, ever since he cornered me by the printer. His breath too close and his words too careful. Insurance. I plugged it in and backed up the recordings onto 3 separate drives. I sent a text to Tara Linwood. "Gwen, are you free Saturday morning? I need your legal brain." Her reply came instantly. "Tara, yes. What happened?" "Gwen, I said no to the wrong man, and he fired me." "Tara, coffee or war room?" "Gwen, let's start with coffee." Later that night, I curled up on the couch and called Mom. This time, I didn't lie. I told her I'd been fired. There was silence on the line for a long moment. Then she said, "Was it about what you wouldn't do?" I froze. How did you? Because I've been there, she said quietly. Long time ago. I didn't speak up. I thought it would ruin me. What happened? I stayed quiet, and I still regret it. I swallowed. My throat ached more than I expected. I'm not staying quiet, I said. I know, she replied. That's why I'm proud of you. We hung up, and I returned to my notebook. I opened to the next blank page. Day 2. They made their move. Now it's my turn. He thought I was gone, but I wasn't even getting started. Tara's face tightened when she read the NDA. This is hush money. Gwen, nothing more. Anne. We were sitting at the Daily Roast, tucked into the corner booth we used to share back in college when we crammed for finals. The same chip table, the same chalkboard menu, and somehow the same stale blueberry muffins. Tara, now a junior partner at Linwood and Blake, hadn't changed much, just sharper suits, quicker reflexes, and more steel in her voice. I slid the NDA across the table toward her. She didn't need long. 2 weeks of pay for 5 years of service. In exchange for your silence, she said. It's insulting. I nodded. That's how they play it. Quiet exits. And if you sign, they own your voice. I'm not signing, I said. She leaned forward. Then we go to war. Her confidence steadied me, but only for a moment, because war meant evidence, documentation, proofs, and that's when the anxiety started crawling up my spine. I saved emails. I told her. Texts. I forwarded everything to my personal account. Perfect, Tara said. We build from there. I pulled out my phone to show her, opened my email and froze. Inbox empty. I blinked, checked the folder, then another, then the sent box, then trash. Nothing. I felt the blood drain from my face. What's wrong? She asked. They're gone. Everything's gone. I logged into my Gmail from her laptop. Still nothing. I tried my backup account. Same. Years of forwarded messages, screenshots, calendar invites, all erased. That's not possible, Tara said. I'm telling you, it's like I never worked there. We drove straight to my apartment and pulled out my desktop tower. We scanned flash drives, backup folders, synced clouds, anything I had touched. Everything related to Stratus Core was gone. Tara made a call to a friend in cybersecurity. He checked logs. There had been a legal takedown request filed with my internet provider 3 days earlier. A court-ordered data wipe, citing confidential corporate materials. But that makes no sense. I said, that data was mine. Not if they argued you had no right to it once terminated. Tara muttered, pacing. They're trying to wipe your narrative off the map. Can they really do this? Not if it's retaliation, she said. But we need something, anything. Do you still have the recordings? I reached into my filing cabinet and pulled out a small black flash drive. I plugged it in and held my breath. They were still there, 17 audio files, each labeled by date and time. The most recent one, Vegas trip conversation, R12. Tara exhaled. You recorded that meeting, every private interaction with him since the break room incident. You're a damn genius. But I didn't feel like one. I felt violated, like they'd crept into my home, my inbox, my past, and erased me. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, my room dark except for the faint blue light of the street lamps bleeding through the blinds. I kept hearing Eric's voice in my head, calm, manipulative, like he owned the very air I breathed at work. At 10:41 p.m, my doorbell rang. I froze. I wasn't expecting anyone. I tiptoed to the peephole. It was Sandra, from HR, holding a manila folder and looking over her shoulder like someone might be following her. I opened the door just enough to speak through the chain. Sandra, can I come in for a moment? She whispered. I hesitated, then unlatched the chain and let her step inside. She looked nervous, jumpy. Even, her trench coat was damp, and her hair was pulled back in a way that said she hadn't been home yet. I hope you don't mind, she said. I got your address from the old employee directory before they lock it. What are you doing here? She took a breath, then held out the folder. I've been keeping records, notes, about Eric, things I overheard, things I witnessed. I never knew what to do with them until now. I opened the folder. Inside were 5 years of handwritten notes, meeting dates, staff events, annotations of inappropriate comments, observations of strange performance review patterns, lists of women who'd been terminated under questionable pretenses, all with dates, times, witnesses. My throat tightened. Why now? Because I've seen this before, she said. They let him get away with it because he brought in revenue. But I've always believed someone would eventually stand up to him. I looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time, not as the HR representative who recited company policy in a monotone voice, but as a woman who'd been watching, waiting. There's more, she said. There was another woman, 3 years ago, Elise Granger, same story. He invited her on a trip. She said no. A week later, she was gone. They buried her in legal paperwork until she gave up. I closed the folder slowly. Do you know where I can find her? Sandra nodded. She works at a small PR firm in Seattle now. I already reached out. When I told her what happened to you, she said she'd been waiting for someone else to come forward. I sank onto the couch, folder in my lap. This wasn't just my story. It never had been. You were never alone. Gwen, Sandra said, voice soft. I've been waiting for someone like you. Elise didn't ask why I called. She just said, I knew this day would come. She met me at a quiet cafe in Seattle mid-morning, midweek, the kind of time when no one's around but freelancers and people with nowhere else to be. She looked nothing like I expected. Confident, put together, blazer and boots, sharp bob, the kind of woman you'd see heading into a firm on Fifth Avenue. But her eyes knew things. I always thought it would eat him alive eventually, she said, stirring her tea, but I didn't think anyone else would take the hit. I didn't take the hit, I replied. He did, he just doesn't know it yet. Elise smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was the kind of smile you wear when you've waited years for someone else to see what you saw. I brought something, she said, sliding a flash drive across the table. I stared at it. It was small, black, nothing remarkable. I kept it after the lawyers warned me not to. HR tried to bury me, too, said I was a problem employee, gave me a neutral reference just to make me go away. But I saved everything. I picked up the flash drive carefully, like it might burn. When I heard about you, she continued, I felt sick, not because it was happening again, but because I knew it hadn't stopped. That afternoon, Tara and I sat in her downtown office, blinds drawn. Her assistant brought us coffee we didn't drink. We plugged in Elisa's flash drive, emails, calendar logs, screenshots, performance reviews with sudden downward shifts. Right after she declined a trip, notes from HR, 3 recordings, 2 hallway conversations, 1 in the copy room. Eric's voice, calm, syrupy, predatory. I should have done more, Elise said, arms folded. But I didn't have anyone back then. You do now, Tara said. I didn't say anything. I was too busy reading the last folder. Pattern of behavior. It wasn't just Elise. There were 7 names, 7 women, over 6 years. Most of them had been terminated or resigned under duress. None of them had spoken up. Until now, Tara called someone that night. I'd heard the name before, but only in articles about high-profile employment lawsuits. Harriet Quinn. The next day, we met her on Zoom. She appeared on screen with a silver streak in her hair and eyes like polished stone. I've seen companies like Stratus Core before, Harriet said. Logistics, defense contractors, thin air teams, broad legal shields. They rely on fear and attrition, but sexual harassment law doesn't care about your security clearance. Tara filled her in. I watched Harriet nod slowly, once, like she already knew where this was going. We don't go after the manager, Harriet said. We go after the system that protected him. And if they delete everything, I asked. They already tried, but they can't delete people. She outlined a 3-step plan. File an amended complaint with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, using Elisa's evidence and Sandra's records. Loop in media contacts at the Portland Chronicle journalists who specialized in corporate accountability. Identify other potential victims. Once the first domino falls, she said, they'll come forward. They always do. That weekend, I reached out to every woman I'd met over the years at Stratus Core. Quiet messages, LinkedIn connections, careful wording. Did you ever feel uncomfortable working with Eric? Would you be willing to speak privately about your experience? The responses came slow at first, then faster. Stephanie, Rachel, Natalie, Clarissa, each story different, each one painfully similar. Stephanie had been demoted after refusing to have dinner with a potential client Eric had handpicked. Rachel had kept a personal journal detailed logs from her 2 years as his assistant because she knew one day someone would need them. Natalie had been fired after complaining about persistent boundary violations. Clarissa had been given poor reviews out of nowhere after ending a friendship she never agreed to. We compiled the testimonies, encrypted everything, and added them to the file. Elise, Tara, and I met again Monday night, this time in my apartment. We sat cross-legged on the living room rug, surrounded by open laptops and hard copies, red pens, folders labeled by initials. Sandra joined us. She brought snacks. She also brought a printed timeline she'd created herself, with color-coded tabs by year. She had always looked so meek in HR meetings. Tonight, she was something else entirely. Harriet reviewed the package and nodded once. This is more than enough to move forward. But just to be sure, I've called someone from the Chronicle. They've been watching Stratus Core for a while. If this breaks public, it breaks wide. I looked around at the women in my living room. Elise, who had held on to evidence for 3 years. Sandra, who had taken notes in silence while watching one promotion after another go to men who kept secrets. Tara, whose hands never shook even when mine did. We weren't the same people who started this story. We weren't scared anymore. We weren't just filing a complaint. We were lighting a match. The article dropped at 9:10. May, by 3 p. May, Redline stock had lost 12 at. It was surreal seeing my story in print, not just mine ours. Elise's, Sandra's, Rachel's, 9 women over 6 years, documented and finally visible. The Portland Chronicle ran the piece under the headline, Defense Contractor Faces Allegations of Systemic Harassment. Harriet had warned me that the company would retaliate, but I hadn't expected them to move so fast. At 10:37, Mal. My phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. Gwen Mathers. Yes, this is Robert Chen, legal counsel for Stratus Core. I understand you've been in contact with external legal representatives regarding your recent termination. I have. I'd like to remind you that the non-disclosure agreement we offered you contained mutual protections, important safeguards for both parties. I didn't sign it, which puts us in a more adversarial posture, he said smoothly. We may be forced to present internal documentation indicating that your termination was performance-related. These include client complaints, missed deadlines, and insubordination. My fingers clenched around the phone. Are you threatening me? Mr. Chen, I'm explaining the legal consequences of continuing down this path. I didn't respond. We're still prepared to offer a reasonable settlement, he continued. 12 months salary, positive reference, a charitable contribution in your name. In return, you agreed to a mutual non-disclosure and drop any active complaints. And the other women, I'm afraid we can only address your situation at this time. I hung up. Harriet didn't even flinch when I told her. Classic, she said. They're trying to isolate you, divide and conquer. They're hoping I'll take the money and disappear. Exactly. And if you were alone, it might work. But you're not anymore. She told me not to respond. Let them sweat. Let the calls build. Let the reporters circle. By noon, I'd received 15 emails from journalists around the country. NP, Bloomberg, even someone from The Atlantic. I didn't reply to any of them. I simply forwarded everything to Harriet's office with the subject line, forwarded for review, no comment yet. At 3:20 p.m. Mesa, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a name I hadn't expected to see. Denise Donnelly. I stared at the screen until it went dark. Then I let it buzz again. On the third try, I picked up. Gwen, she said. Her voice was calm, controlled. Denise, I saw the article. I figured you might. Silence stretched between us. I could hear faint traffic in the background. She was somewhere outside. I need to ask you something, she said finally. Did Eric ever talk about me? I closed my eyes. Yes. What did he say? That the marriage was over. That you didn't understand him. That he was planning to leave. There was no gasp, no sobby, just the slow inhale of someone who already knew the truth. How many women? At least 9 that we've documented. Probably more. Another pause. Do you have evidence? Texts? Recordings? I do. So do several others. She didn't speak for a moment. Then, would you be willing to share them with my attorney? Yes. Good. Because I filed for separation this morning, and I'm filing for divorce on grounds of adultery and emotional abuse. The line went dead. That night, I sat in my apartment surrounded by screenshots, files, and statements. I should have felt exhausted, but something else carried me now, something stronger than fear, conviction. I messaged Elise, then Sandra, then Harriet. Everyone was still in. Harriet texted, "Tomorrow we go public with the second wave. More victims are ready." I smiled for the first time all day. The next morning, the Chronicle ran a follow-up. Former employees. Detail pattern of retaliation and silence at defense contractor. Elisa's voice was quoted. Rachel's journal was cited. My name appeared again, along with 2 new women who'd come forward anonymously. By noon, the Department of Defense issued a statement. We are reviewing current contracts with Stratus Core Solutions. In light of recent developments, 60% of their revenue came from federal defense deals. By mid-afternoon, the board of directors issued a press release. Effective immediately. Eric Donnelly is no longer employed with Stratus Core. I read the headline out loud. Then again, quieter. I wasn't surprised. I wasn't even satisfied. I felt something deeper. Stillness. Later that evening, Tara and I met at the Daily Roast. Same booth. 2 cups of decaf. A single biscotti between us. You did it, she said. We did it. Doesn't feel real yet. Huh. No, but it feels right. We sat in silence for a while, just letting the moment breathe. Then I looked out the window at the people passing by, the ones in suits, the ones in sneakers, the ones who'd never know what it meant to be quiet for too long. And I knew, deep in my bones, we weren't just survivors. We were witnesses. We were architects of change. I'm not just divorcing a man, Denise had said. I'm exposing a predator. 3 months ago, I lost my job. Now, he's the one who can't show his face in this city. It was a bright, quiet morning in June when I walked past the Stratus Corps headquarters one last time. The glass building stood as if nothing had happened. Same receptionist behind the counter, same potted plants near the elevator. But something had changed. The nameplate outside now bore a new interim director, and the tall poster that used to feature Eric Donnelly's face as Regional VP of Operations had been removed, replaced by blank space. It felt fitting. I hadn't come to gloat. I came to see the door close with my own eyes. Inside, I knew HR was being rebuilt under new compliance standards. Outside, the world had moved on, but not without taking notice. The Department of Defense had suspended all new contracts with Stratus Corps, pending full internal review. That alone had wiped millions off their valuation. But this wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about something bigger. A week earlier, I'd received an email from a recruiter at Brightcrest Analytics, a mid-sized consulting firm in Seattle, female-owned, values-forward, known for transparency and integrity. The CEO, Miriam Hollis, had read the Chronicle articles. "I don't just want to hire you," she wrote. "I want to build with you." I'd turned down 4 other offers before that. Bigger salaries, flashier titles, but none of them felt right. They all reminded me too much of where I'd come from. Polished floors, hiding rotten walls. At Brightcrest, I found something I hadn't felt in years. Safety. Elise, meanwhile, had accepted a position at a non-profit focused on workplace reform. She used part of her settlement payout to fund a legal assistance program for low-income women facing harassment in male-dominated industries. Sandra was promoted to accounting manager at Stratus Corps. New leadership had been brought in, and this time, they were listening, not pretending, actually listening. Rachel Bin's journal was submitted as part of a case study on corporate retaliation, now being used in HR seminars. Even Tara got a new nickname around the office, the Quiet Sledgehammer. And me, I moved into a smaller apartment in Seattle, quieter, more light. I started drinking oat milk in my coffee, not because it was trendy, because it made me feel like I was choosing something better, something new. The day I signed my final settlement agreement, Harriet Quinn handed me a thick folder. "These are your copies," she said. "But more importantly, this." She tapped a flash drive inside as your voice. "Never forget what happens when you use it." I took it, slid it into my coat pocket, that same coat I wore the day I walked out with a cardboard box and no clue what came next. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I just breathed. Saturday night, I sat at my kitchen table with a glass of wine and that flash drive on the table in front of me. I thought about all the women who came before me, the ones who whispered warnings in bathrooms, the ones who lowered their eyes in meetings, the ones who kept journals and screenshots and little pieces of truth because they had nothing else. I opened the drive. Then I copied everything onto a new one. I labeled it, "For when she's ready," because somewhere, someone is going through this exact thing, and she needs to know she's not alone. The next morning, I got a call from Mom. She didn't ask how work was. She said, "I read the article. I saw what you did." I waited. Then she said, "I always told you to keep your head down." I was wrong. That was all, but it meant everything. At lunch that day, one of the interns at Brightcrest, her name was Liana, maybe 23, maybe even younger, looked like she'd been holding something in all day. She cornered me in the hallway and said, "I just wanted to say thank you." "For what?" I asked. "For not signing it. For talking." I smiled. "Are you okay?" She nodded. "I am now." She turned to go, but I stopped her, reached into my bag and pulled out the flash drive Harriet gave me. "Here," I said, "just in case." She looked at it like it was a relic, something sacred. "Keep this, for when they say you're imagining things. Sometimes, justice doesn't knock. Sometimes, it marches in with backup. Sometimes speaking up feels like setting your whole life on fire. But silence can burn you slowly for years." Gwen's story reminds us that doing the right thing may cost you everything at first, but it can also set others free. When one woman stood her ground, others found their voice. Never underestimate the power of quiet strength. Don't let fear or policy silence truth, and never, ever assume someone will stay small just because you tried to make them invisible. Because sometimes, the people you try to erase come back and they bring others with them.